Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video we will talk about the 3 most common mistakes when using the wet on wet technique. At the end of this video, we will also talk more about what the cauliflower effect is and how to fix it, and some practices which you may try on your own time to improve your skills. So let's get right into it. To give you some background, wet on wet technique is used when a paint is applied onto a wet area. This technique is commonly used when painting backgrounds in a landscape or when painting skies, as it gives a soft, blurry effect that allows colors to mix into one another and create these beautiful blends. This is an amazing and fun technique to use, but often beginners struggle a lot with it. The number 1 most common mistake is having too much water on your paper. The areas in the center which are nice and wet will cause the paints to spread and explode out beautifully. However, excess water tends to collect and pools around the corner of your sheet, resulting in puddles. When paint is applied on top of these puddles, instead of spreading out and interacting with other colors, these paints remain stuck in this pool. When the second color is applied, it might also flow into the same puddle and you'll end up with muddy colors collecting at the corner. And due to the amount of water soaking in the area, it takes a really long time for it to dry. Skipping ahead, this is what it looks like after it's fully dried. We see some cauliflower effect happening at the corners due to water pooling, and we will talk about this later. On the flip side, the second most common mistake is applying too little water. This tends to happen when the first layer of pre-wetting is not properly done, leaving out some dry areas. When the paints are applied across these dry areas, you may end up with these harsh edges. You will also notice that due to the lack of water during the first layer, the paints did not spread out as much as it did comparing to when too much water was applied in the earlier example. The paints just stayed at the area where the brush touched the paper. So to do this correctly, first, apply water starting from the top left of the paper and spread the water across to the right and then moving downwards. Be sure to cover every spot, especially the corners. If you are unsure, tilt your paper sideways and you'll see a nice flat shine on the paper. If it appears matte, reapply water on that area. If there are puddles collecting, remove them with a paper towel or with a clean dry brush. Once this is done, I usually like to let it sit for a few seconds before applying my paints. This will give it some time for the water to properly sink into the paper. Then when the paints are applied, you will see that the colors easily spread out and blend into one another, creating this beautiful transition of soft colors. And this brings us to the third most common mistake, which is not knowing when to stop. I am sure all of us are guilty of this, including me. So let me give you an example. After the first layer of paints have been laid out, I find that my blues are not saturated enough. But there aren't any paints left on my palette, so I go ahead and mix and prepare more paints. When I'm ready to drop in the paints, oops! I ended up with these ruined looking strokes. What you're seeing here on this area is called watercolor blooms, also known as cauliflower. Okay, so let's rewind for a bit. What happened was that while I was busy preparing more paints, my paper has started entering the drying phase. The surface of the paper usually dries unevenly, and this is when we have some parts of the paper being more damp, while other parts more dry. And when paints are added during this phase, the paints will spread from the damp area towards the drying area, and therefore leaving these cauliflower marks. This is another example if a thicker, more concentrated mix is added, and instead of blooms, we end up with harsh, bold lines like this. So it is important to stop adding or disturbing the paints as the paper enters the drying phase. If you like to add more layers, first allow the paper to fully dry, then re-wet the paper with water, and then continue working on your painting. So how would you know when does the drying phase start, and how would you know when is the right time to stop? It is hard to gauge as the drying time depends on the type of paper you use and the amount of water that is in your paper, which is why I'll be demonstrating this experiment, which you should try out on your own as a good practice. Here I lay down a first layer of blue paints on both papers. Make sure that they are both still equally wet. Then on the left paper, I add in a drop of more diluted blue on the top. And for the paper on the right, I add in a layer of a thicker mixture of blue. After a while, I will repeat the same steps as we work our way downwards. This goes on until we can see the layer is totally dried out. Now let's take a look at our left paper. The diluted blue started nice and soft as it blended smoothly outwards. As time passes, we can see that the paints does not bloom out so much and harsh edges starting to form, resulting in the cauliflower effect. And if we look at the last drop, the paints sat on the top of the paper without spreading out. This indicates that the paper has fully dried out. As for the paper on the right, similarly the paints spread out lesser with time and slowly form more harsh edges. From this, I could tell that the paper on the left entered the drying phase at the fourth droplet, and the right paper entered the drying phase at the second droplet. That is because I used two different papers for this experiment. So do give this a try so that you'll be able to study and understand your papers better and to gauge how much time you have to paint until it enters the drying phase. But if you do this mistake, fret not. First, allow the paper to fully dry and then pre-wet the entire area with water. If you are lucky, you may still be able to blend off those harsh edges with your brush. Then, add a layer of blue wash on top to cover off the remaining harsh edges and smoothen out the entire area. And now we have our flat wash bag. Well, that's the end of this video. I hope this will help you to learn how to avoid these mistakes for the wet on wet technique and how to fix them. If you have any questions or have any other topics you'd like me to cover, do comment below and let me know. Till then, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, bye!